The judge's gavel was poised to fall, a wooden hammer hanging in the silent air of the courtroom, ready to shatter my life. Across the room, my Uncle Mark sat beside his lawyer, wearing a mask of rehearsed sorrow. He looked every bit the grieving brother, the responsible patriarch forced to take his wayward nephew to court for the good of the family. He shot me a look, a fleeting, triumphant smirk that the judge couldn't see. He thought he had already won. He believed the money, my parents' life insurance money, was already his. He had no idea that the lawsuit he filed against me wasn't a threat. It was the final, crucial piece of my trap. He didn't realize that suing me for $500,000 was the only way I could legally, publicly, and permanently destroy him with a secret I'd held for 3 months. The court filing was his confession, signed and delivered by his own hand. You're probably wondering why a man would try to take the life insurance meant for his own dead brother's only child. To understand how we got here in this sterile courtroom filled with whispers and lies, you have to understand the man my uncle truly is. And that story doesn't begin with my parents' tragic accident, but with 25 years of being the family's scapegoat. It begins with a broken promise, a lifetime of being told I was worthless, and a decision I made on the day I buried my parents, that the injustice would end with them. I would not be the next victim of his greed. I would be the one to finally make him pay for everything. My father was the older brother, but Uncle Mark always acted like the king. Dad was a gentle soul, a man who believed a quiet word was more powerful than a shout. My mother was the same, full of warmth but allergic to confrontation. Their passivity created a space that Mark filled with his booming voice and overbearing personality. He wasn't the head of the family by right. He just declared himself to be, and no one, especially not my parents, ever had the courage to challenge him. In his world, there were only winners and losers, and he made sure everyone knew which category they fell into. His family was the yardstick against which everyone else was measured. His son, Alex, was the golden child, a paragon of supposed perfection. Alex's achievements were magnified and broadcast at every family gathering, while his failures were conveniently ignored. I was the opposite. I was the scapegoat, the designated failure whose purpose was to make Alex look better. If Alex got a B on a test, it was because the teacher was unfair. If I got a B, it was proof of my inherent laziness. When Alex made the JV basketball team, he was a future NBA star. When I won first place in a statewide science fair, Uncle Mark asked me if my little hobby would ever make any real money. The injustice was a constant, dull ache. I remember on my 17th birthday, my parents gave me a used 20-year-old sedan. It was the most generous gift they could afford, and I was genuinely grateful. 2 weeks later, at a family dinner, Uncle Mark tossed Alex the keys to a brand new sports car for his 17th birthday. A young man of Alex's caliber needs a ride that reflects his potential, Mark announced to the table, staring directly at me. My dad just looked down at his plate. My mom patted my hand under the table, a silent apology she would never speak aloud. I learned to live with the bitter taste of resentment. I built walls around myself, stopped sharing my accomplishments, and poured all my energy into my studies, not for their approval, but as an escape. I dreamed of a future where my worth wasn't determined by my uncle's biased pronouncements. I didn't know then that he wouldn't be content just to belittle me. I didn't know that one day he would try to take everything from me, including the last legacy my parents left behind. I was in the university library, buried in textbooks for my final exams, when I got the call. It was a state trooper, his voice calm but heavy, delivering a message that didn't seem real. A highway, a patch of black ice, a truck that lost control. The words fatal and instantaneous were clinical, sterile terms for something so violent and world-shattering. My parents, who'd been driving home from a weekend trip, were gone. Just like that. The world didn't just stop, it evaporated, leaving me in a silent, gray vacuum. I was 22 years old, and in the space of a 30-second phone call, I had become an orphan. Before the sun rose the next day, Uncle Mark was at my apartment. He and Aunt Karen swept in with a flurry of activity and performative grief. Mark wrapped me in a suffocating hug, his hand patting my back a little too hard, as if trying to force strength into me. "I'm here now," he announced, his voice a low rumble. "I'll handle everything. You just focus on, well, you don't focus on anything. I've got it." In my shattered state, his take charge attitude felt like a relief. I was drowning, and he was throwing me what I thought was a life raft. He organized the funeral, fielded calls from relatives, and spoke with the authorities. He was a bastion of control in the middle of my chaos. But looking back, the signs were there, small and insidious. While discussing the eulogy, he paused and asked, "Your dad kept all his important documents in the study, right? The will, bank statements, insurance papers?" I just nodded numbly, too deep in my own sorrow to notice the unnerving practicality of the question. A few days later, while clearing out my parents' house, he found their life insurance policy in the desk drawer. He held it in his hands for a moment too long. "Good," he murmured, more to himself than to me. At least they were sensible about this. He was planting his flag. At the funeral, he stood before everyone and gave a moving speech about his bond with my father. He spoke of promises made between brothers, of looking out for each other's families, no matter what. He painted himself as the loyal soldier, the keeper of my father's legacy. He was masterful. Everyone there saw a man crushed by grief, stepping up to protect his orphaned nephew. I saw it too. I wanted to see it. It was the last time I would ever mistake his greed for love. The casseroles stopped coming after a week. The sympathetic phone calls dwindled to texts and then to nothing. The silence in my parents' house was deafening. It was in that silence that Uncle Mark chose to make his move. He called and said he needed to come over to help me sort through the financials. He arrived not with a hug, but with a leather briefcase, laying out papers on the dining room table like he was preparing for a corporate takeover. He spoke of funeral expenses, outstanding bills, and probate court, using a stream of jargon designed to make me feel small and incompetent. After half an hour of this, he leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "David," he began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "we need to discuss the life insurance. That $500,000 policy." I just nodded, a cold dread beginning to creep up my spine. "That's a life-changing amount of money," he continued. "And with that comes a tremendous responsibility. A responsibility your father wasn't sure you were ready for." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The policy names me as the sole beneficiary." He waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a fly. "Legal documents are one thing, a brother's promise is another. David, your father and I had an understanding. He knew you were creative, not practical. He always said that if anything were to happen, he trusted me to manage the family's assets to make sure the money was used wisely." He paused, letting the lie hang in the air between us. "For the good of the entire family." Then came the real punch. "Alex is looking at business schools," he said, his tone now bright and proud. "Top-tier programs. An investment in his future is an investment in this family's name. Your father would have wanted to contribute. He knew Alex had the drive to build something lasting. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just suggesting I share my inheritance. He was informing me that my parents' legacy was going to be funneled to his son, the golden child, while I, their actual child, was being written off as an irresponsible artist who couldn't be trusted with his own inheritance. The supportive uncle was gone. In his place sat a smiling predator. I stared at him, the shock giving way to a slow, burning anger. "No," I said, the word cutting through the quiet room. "Absolutely not. There was no understanding. My parents left that money for me. Period. You know as well as I do they would never, ever take from their son to give to their nephew." His mask of concern finally dropped completely. His face hardened, his eyes turning to cold little chips of stone. "Don't you lecture me on what your father would have wanted," he snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "You're letting grief make you hysterical and selfish. I'm trying to honor a sacred promise between brothers, and you're acting like a spoiled child." He leaned back in his chair, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Let's be honest, David. What are you going to do with that kind of money? You have a degree in art history. You're not equipped to handle it. It would be gone in a few years, wasted on some fleeting passion project. Alex, on the other hand, can turn that into a real legacy. The insult was the same one he'd been using my whole life, just with more zeros attached. I was the dreamer. Alex was the doer. I was the liability. Alex was the asset. I'm trying to protect you from yourself, he said, the condescension dripping from every word. And I'm trying to do what's best for the family name. Your parents would be horrified to see you being so short-sighted, so unwilling to contribute to the greater good. I stood up from the table, my legs feeling unsteady. Get out of my house, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't known I possessed. He stood up as well, looming over me. Think very carefully about this, David, he warned, his voice a venomous whisper. You can be reasonable and we can handle this as a family, or you can be difficult. If you choose to fight me, you will be the one responsible for breaking this family apart. That will be your legacy. He turned and walked out, not waiting for a reply, leaving me alone in the silent house. The air was thick with his threats and his greed. He had drawn his line in the sand. He didn't just want the money, he wanted to prove once and for all that I was worthless. In that moment, I made a silent promise to my parents. He would not win. For the next 2 weeks, I existed in a state of suspended animation. I tried calling Aunt Karen, hoping that some shred of decency remained. She cut me off before I could finish my first sentence. Your uncle is a good man, David. He's just trying to do what's right, and you are making this incredibly painful for everyone. I am so disappointed in you. The line went dead. I reached out to other relatives, aunts and cousins I'd known my whole life. I was met with a wall of silence, or worse, quiet lectures about respecting my elders and the importance of family unity, which was their code for give Mark what he wants and stop causing trouble. The verdict was in. I was alone. Then the official declaration of war arrived. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, delivered by a courier requiring a signature. It was from a downtown law firm, the kind with a long, fancy name designed to intimidate. Inside, pages of dense legal text made my stomach turn. It was a lawsuit. My own uncle was suing me, his dead brother's son, for my parents' entire life insurance policy. The legal claim was a breathtaking work of fiction. His lawyers argued that a long-standing verbal agreement existed between the brothers. They claimed my father had entrusted Mark with the responsibility of overseeing the family's financial future and that the insurance money was intended as a family asset to be managed by Mark. The suit specifically mentioned funding Alex's MBA and future business ventures as the primary purpose of this asset. They were formally accusing me of unjust enrichment, alleging that I was hoarding money that was morally, if not legally, intended for the betterment of the family line. The lawsuit was his public statement. He told the family he had no choice, that he was heartbroken it had come to this, but he had to honor his brother's wishes. He was the noble patriarch, forced into a painful decision by his greedy, ungrateful nephew. The suit was designed to break me, to bury me in legal fees and shame me into surrendering. Staring at the papers, the last of my sorrow burned away, leaving something cold and hard in its place. He wanted a war? I would give him one. He thought this lawsuit was the finishing blow. He had no idea he'd just handed me the weapon I needed to end this forever. The lawsuit was the splash of icy water I needed. It woke me from my grief-stricken stupor and replaced the sorrow with a cold, clear sense of purpose. I didn't hire a family lawyer. I hired a shark. Her name was Evelyn Albright, a litigator with a reputation for surgically dismantling her opponents in court. I sat in her sterile, modern office and told her everything, from the years of being the family punching bag to the stack of legal papers on her desk. She listened intently, her face impassive. When I finished, she tapped the lawsuit with a perfectly manicured finger. This is a predatory lawsuit, Ms. Davies. Your uncle's claim of a verbal contract is flimsy, but he's not trying to win on merit. He's trying to win by attrition. He assumes you'll run out of money or emotional fortitude long before this sees a courtroom. The pragmatic advice is to offer him a nuisance settlement to make him go away. No, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. I'm not giving him a penny. And I don't just want this to go away, I want to win. I want to win in a way that leaves no doubt in anyone's mind who he really is. A flicker of interest crossed Ms. Albright's face. Vindication can be a very expensive verdict. I have a plan, I said, leaning forward. My uncle's biggest weakness has always been his ego. He genuinely believes I'm an incompetent child. I'm going to use that. I'm going to call him and tell him he was right, that I can't handle the stress of a lawsuit, that I want to talk. No lawyers, just him and me, to work things out. And you think he'll agree? She asked, intrigued. I know he will. The chance to have me admit he was right, to see me beg? He wouldn't miss that for the world, I explained. When we meet, he'll lecture me. He'll gloat. He will tell me exactly why he's entitled to my parents' money. He won't be able to help himself. And I'm going to get a full recording of it. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Miss Albright's face. Mr. Davies, she said, leaning back in her chair, I believe we are going to get along splendidly. That evening, I picked up my phone, practiced a suitably defeated and broken tone in my voice, and dialed my uncle's number. It was time to set the trap. He chose the meeting spot, a bench in a public park, midway between his office and my parents' house. It was a power move, making me come to him. My heart hammered against my ribs, but on the outside, I was a picture of defeat. In my jacket pocket, my finger rested on the small digital recorder. The light was on. It was capturing everything. I had rehearsed this in my head 100 times. I was no longer David, the grieving son. I was David, the broken nephew, ready to surrender. He arrived looking magnanimous, a king accepting tribute from a conquered province. David, he said, his voice full of feigned sympathy, this is the right thing to do. I'm proud of you for being the bigger man. I kept my eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement. I can't fight you, Uncle Mark, I mumbled, letting my voice crack. The legal bills are already piling up. Aunt Karen won't even speak to me. You've won. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. This was the moment he had been waiting for. It's not about winning or losing, he said, launching into the sermon I knew was coming. It's about honoring your father. He was a good man, but he was terrible with money, a dreamer. If it wasn't for me steering him right over the years, he'd have lost his house twice over. He knew that. That's why we had the understanding. He trusted me to be the practical one, to protect his legacy from the same soft-heartedness he passed on to you. He was now rewriting history, painting my capable father as an idiot and himself as the secret savior. This money isn't for you to go chasing artistic fantasies, David. It's seed capital. It's for building something real. Alex has that killer instinct. You don't. This isn't a gift. It's a family asset, and I am the fund manager. The lawsuit was simply the tool I had to use to make you see that. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. So here's my offer. You sign over the policy to me. I'll drop the lawsuit. And to show there are no hard feelings, I'll give you $20,000. A little nest egg. It's a generous deal, more than you'd have left after the lawyers were done with you. $20,000. $500,000 for his son, and a pittance for me to thank me for my trouble. It was all there. His greed, his contempt, his admission that the lawsuit was a sham. I walked away from that bench feeling sick to my stomach, but my hand never left my pocket. I had him. When I walked into Ms. Albright's office, my hands were still shaking, but this time it was with adrenaline, not fear. We sat in a conference room and I played the recording for her. We listened in silence as my uncle's voice filled the room, arrogant, condescending, and utterly damning. When the audio ended, she took off her glasses and polished them slowly. Well, she said, her voice calm but sharp, he didn't just confess. He gift-wrapped his own coffin. She leaned forward, her expression shifting to one of strategic concern. Now that we have this, he's going to become a cornered animal. He'll bury us in legal motions. This will get very expensive, very fast. I need to know you're prepared for that. This was the moment. Ms. Albright, I said, my uncle's entire case is built on the idea that I'm a naive, struggling kid who can't be trusted with $500,000. He's wrong about the trust, but he's spectacularly wrong about the struggling part. I slid a folder across the polished mahogany table. Inside were my personal financial statements. She opened it, her eyes scanning the first page. Her professional poker face held, but I saw a flicker in her eyes, a brief moment of genuine shock before it was gone. The number at the bottom of the summary page was just north of $20 million. While my uncle was mocking my art history degree, I explained, I was spending my nights coding. During my last year of university, I developed a specialized piece of inventory management software for rare book collectors. A major auction house acquired the company and the patent 4 months before my parents' accident. I never told my extended family. I never upgraded my car or bought a fancy watch. My success was the one thing in my life that he hadn't been able to touch, criticize, or try to take credit for. It was mine. The life insurance money wasn't a lifeline for me. It was a symbol. It was the last thing my parents had given me, and my uncle, in his ignorance and greed, was trying to steal it. Not from a pauper, but from a man who could buy and sell him 10 times over. Ms. Albright looked from the folder to the recorder, and a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. It was terrifying and beautiful. "Oh, this changes everything," she whispered, a new level of excitement in her voice. "We're not just going to win, Mr. Davies. We're going to orchestrate a masterpiece of public humiliation." The months leading up to the court date were a calculated war of attrition. My uncle's lawyers buried us in paperwork, depositions, and procedural motions, all designed to drain my resources and my will to fight. He was so certain he was financially crippling me. I paid every legal bill without comment, letting him believe his strategy was working. Patience is the foundation of all great revenge. You must give your enemy the time and space to become comfortable in their arrogance. Then came the day. I walked back into that same courtroom, but this time the dread was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. Uncle Mark was there, seated next to his lawyer. He was wearing his concerned patriarch costume, a tailored suit and a somber expression. In the gallery sat my jury, Aunt Karen, my cousin Alex, and a handful of other relatives, all there to watch my public execution. Alex was looking at his phone, the picture of entitled boredom. He was already spending my money in his head. Mark took the stand and gave the performance of a lifetime. He spoke of his profound love for my father. He invented conversations, weaving a tale of a sacred brother's promise to protect the family from my supposed immaturity and recklessness. He told the judge with a catch in his throat that I was a good kid at heart, just lost and impractical. With tears in his eyes, he claimed he was only there to save me from myself, to protect my father's legacy from being squandered. He lied, under oath, with a conviction that was almost impressive. Through it all, I sat beside Miss Albright, perfectly still. I watched him desecrate my father's memory with his fabrications. I saw the triumphant glances he shot my way, expecting to see me crumble. He mistook my calm for surrender. He had no idea he was testifying at his own funeral. Finally, his lawyer concluded, "The plaintiff rests, Your Honor." The judge nodded and turned his gaze to our table. "Ms. Albright?" My lawyer stood, a picture of deadly calm. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "The defense will not be cross-examining Mr. Davies at this time." A murmur went through the courtroom. Mark looked confused. "Instead," she continued, "the defense would like to present one piece of evidence and then call one witness to the stand. We call David Davies." I walked to the witness stand with a steady, measured pace. I could feel my uncle's stare on my back, a look of utter confusion. He thought I was coming up to be cross-examined, to be torn apart. I swore the oath and sat down, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Ms. Albright approached. "Mr. Davies, I have only a few questions for you. A few weeks ago, you had a private meeting with your uncle, correct?" "Yes," I answered, my voice clear. "And at this meeting, did he make you an offer to end this legal dispute?" "Yes, he did." "Please tell the court what that offer was." I turned my head slightly to look at my uncle, then at the judge. "He offered me $20,000. In exchange, I was to sign over the remaining $480,000 of my parents' life insurance to him. He called it a generous deal." A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. My uncle's face, which had been a mask of confident piety, began to twitch. His lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor! Hearsay!" "Sustained," the judge said flatly, his eyes now fixed on my uncle. "Of course, Your Honor," Ms. Albright said smoothly. "You're right. My client's recollection isn't the best evidence." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air before continuing. "The best evidence would be the plaintiff's own words." "Your Honor, the defense wishes to play for the court a full audio recording of that meeting." It was as if a bomb had been dropped in the silent room. My uncle's jaw fell open. His lawyer, red-faced and panicked, shot up again. "Objection! Your Honor, this is outrageous. A complete surprise. That recording is illegal. It's inadmissible. Ms. Albright cut him off with the calm authority of a lioness. "Your Honor, this state operates under one-party consent for audio recordings, making it perfectly legal. Furthermore, the recording contains a direct admission by the plaintiff that this lawsuit is a sham and that his motive is financial gain. It is not only admissible, it is the most crucial piece of evidence before this court, as it proves the plaintiff has repeatedly perjured himself today on this very stand." The judge stared down at my uncle, whose face had turned a pasty, sickly white. He looked at the sputtering lawyer, then back at Miss Albright. He picked up his gavel, but didn't bang it. "The objection," he said, his voice low and cold, "is overruled. Play the tape." Ms. Albright pressed a button on the digital recorder. After a moment of static, the sounds of a public park filled the courtroom. Distant traffic, birds chirping. Then came my voice, hesitant and small. "I can't fight you, Uncle Mark." And then his voice, booming, confident, and dripping with condescension. "It's not about winning or losing, David. It's about honoring your father." A collective intake of breath came from the gallery. This wasn't a transcript. It was a ghost in the room. The judge's face was stone as he listened to my uncle's recorded voice systematically dismantle the testimony he had just given under oath. The room heard him call my father soft and a dreamer. They heard him call me an irresponsible custodian of my own inheritance. I glanced at my family. Aunt Karen's face was a mess of disbelief and dawning horror. Alex, for the first time, looked completely shaken, his entitled smirk gone, replaced by a vacant stare. They were hearing the unvarnished truth about the man they had supported, the private voice he used when he thought no one of consequence was listening. Then came the part I had waited 3 months to hear echo in this room. My uncle's voice, clear as a bell. "The lawsuit was simply the tool I had to use to make you see that." An admission, a confession of fraudulent litigation in his own arrogant words. The judge's head snapped up and he stared at my uncle with an expression of pure, cold fury. My uncle's lawyer slowly sank in his chair, covering his face with his hand. He knew it was over. My uncle himself looked like he had been physically struck. He stared at the small speaker on the defense table as if it were a snake, his face slick with sweat, his skin a pale, unhealthy gray. He was being forced to watch his own character assassination narrated by himself. When the recording ended with his generous offer of $20,000, a profound and terrible silence descended. It was broken only when the judge slowly took off his glasses and placed them on his desk. He looked down, his gaze bypassing everyone else and landing squarely on my uncle. His voice was deceptively soft, yet it sliced through the room. "Mr. Davies," he said, the words hanging in the air like icicles. "That was you on that recording, was it not?" My uncle could only nod, a pathetic, jerky movement. The king had been dethroned. My uncle's pathetic nod was his final surrender. The judge stared at him for a long, silent moment, his face a mask of cold fury. "In my 20 years on the bench," the judge began, his voice dangerously quiet, "I have never seen such a craven and malicious abuse of the judicial process. This lawsuit is a work of fiction, a predatory attempt to defraud a grieving young man out of his rightful inheritance." He looked directly at my uncle. "You, sir, sat on that stand, under oath, and constructed an elaborate fantasy of brotherly love and noble promises. The truth in your own words is that you are a common thief, cloaking your greed in a veil of family duty. You didn't come here seeking justice. You came here to commit a mugging with paperwork." The judge's voice grew louder with every word. You have wasted this court's time. You have perjured yourself, and you have dishonored the memory of your own brother. This court will not tolerate it. He picked up his gavel. The plaintiff's case is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Bang. The plaintiff is ordered to pay the defendant's full legal fees and all associated court costs. Bang. And this court is referring the full transcript of this proceeding, along with Exhibit A, the audio recording, to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for an immediate investigation into perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud. Bang. The final slam of the gavel echoed like a death knell. The judge then looked at me, and his stern expression softened into something resembling sympathy. Mr. Davies, my condolences on your loss, and my apologies for what you have been forced to endure. You are free to go. It was done. My uncle looked like a man who had been hollowed out, leaving only an empty suit behind. His lawyer was already stuffing papers into his briefcase, avoiding eye contact with the man whose life he had just helped ruin. In the gallery, Aunt Karen was sobbing into her hands. Alex was pale, staring at his father as if he were a stranger. The foundation of their world had just crumbled. As I walked out of the courtroom, I didn't feel triumphant or joyful. I felt light. The war was over. The ghosts of the past had been put to rest. As I stepped out into the courthouse hallway, the full weight of the verdict hit my family like a physical blow. Aunt Karen, her face a crumpled mess of tears, rushed towards me. "David, please," she sobbed, reaching for my arm. "He's a good man. He was just confused, under so much pressure." I pulled my arm back, not roughly, but with a quiet finality. I looked at her, the woman who had coldly dismissed my pain, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty distance. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked away, her pleas fading behind me. My cousin Alex, the golden child whose future was now a smoldering ruin, caught up to me by the elevators. "Dave, man, wait up," he said, his voice laced with a panic I'd never heard from him before. I had no idea. Seriously. Dad never told me. We can fix this. I just looked at him. The boy who had everything, who had stood by silently for years while I was torn down to build him up. I let the elevator doors slide shut, leaving him standing there in the hallway, looking lost and insignificant for the first time in his life. The phone calls and texts started that evening. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all the people who had sided with Mark or stayed silent, were now desperate to talk. They left long, rambling voicemails about how they always had their doubts and were so sorry for how I'd been treated. They were desperate for forgiveness, not because they were truly sorry, but because they had backed the losing side. I didn't listen to a single message. I just deleted them one by one, and then I blocked their numbers. That chapter of my life was closed. A few weeks later, Ms. Albright informed me that my uncle had been forced to sell his beloved sports car and take out a massive loan against his house to pay my legal fees. The DA was proceeding with the perjury charges. His fall from grace was swift and total. The insurance money, the $500,000 that started it all, finally cleared into my account. I didn't touch it. Instead, I used all of it to create a charitable foundation in my parents' names, providing grants to young, struggling artists and musicians, the very people my uncle would have called impractical dreamers. His monument to greed had become my tribute to their love. It's been a year since the gavel fell. The legal case against my uncle for perjury ended in a conviction. He avoided jail time, but was sentenced to probation, a hefty fine, and community service. For a man whose entire identity was built on his reputation and public standing, it was a fate worse than prison. His life is a quiet ruin of his own design. I rarely think about him. He no longer has any power over me. He is no longer relevant. The silence from the rest of the family has been absolute. They chose their side, and when that side crumbled, they were left with nothing but the shame of their own weakness. I have no anger left for them, only a detached sort of pity. They live in a world of surfaces, and I no longer have time for such shallow things. My life is quiet, but it is authentically mine. I still run my company, and I still live modestly. The money was never the point. The money was just the weapon I needed to win the war for my own soul. That day in court wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about taking back the narrative of my own life. For 25 years, my uncle had been the author, casting me as the scapegoat and the failure. The lawsuit was his final, arrogant attempt to write me out of my own story. Playing that recording was not just an act of revenge, it was an act of authorship. I was finally telling the truth in my own voice, using his to do it. I've learned that the satisfaction of revenge is a flash of heat, but the peace of justice is a lasting warmth. Seeing the terror in my uncle's eyes was revenge. But building a life free from his shadow, using the money he coveted to create something beautiful in my parents' name, that is justice. Justice is not about the destruction of your enemy, it's about the construction of yourself. I honor my parents now, not by dwelling on the ugliness of one man's greed, but by living the full, happy, and peaceful life they always wanted for me. A life that is finally completely my own.